In 1990, Coca-Cola unleashed their MagiCan stunt, 750,000 cans rigged to eject spring-loaded cash prizes worth up to $500 each. Instead of magic, many customers got a mouthful of foul-smelling chlorinated water spiked with ammonium sulfate. Though harmless, it reeked like rotten eggs and turned drinking Coke into a prank gone horribly wrong. The ammonium sulfate was actually added as a safety feature, so leaking cans would smell rancid and warn customers off. But when the mechanism failed spectacularly, regular Coke drinkers started getting mouthfuls of the stink bomb cocktail without knowing what hit them. What started as revolutionary marketing technology became one of the most embarrassing promotional disasters in corporate history. The genius marketing scheme that backfired instantly. The scale of Coca-Cola's MagiCan promotion was absolutely massive. We're talking about 750,000 specially engineered cans that were going to be distributed across the entire United States during the summer of 1990. Each can contain real cash prizes ranging from $5 all the way up to $500, plus coupons for free Coca-Cola products. The company was so confident in this campaign that they branded the entire summer as their Magic Summer and planned to spend millions on advertising and celebrity endorsements to support it. The engineering behind these MagiCans was genuinely impressive for 1990. Coca-Cola's engineers had developed a spring-loaded mechanism that would automatically eject the prize the moment someone opened the can. Picture this. You crack open what looks like a normal Coke can, and instead of liquid, a small cylinder containing cash or coupons shoots up through the opening. The mechanism was housed in a sealed compartment that took up about half the can's interior space, leaving the prize completely dry and protected from any moisture or contamination. But here's where the engineering got complicated. A half-empty can would obviously feel different from a regular Coke, and Coca-Cola couldn't have people shaking cans in stores trying to identify the prize cans. So they needed to fill the remaining space with something that would make the MagiCan weigh exactly the same as a normal 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola. Their solution was to fill the leftover reservoir with chlorinated water, the same stuff that comes out of your tap after municipal water treatment. This chlorinated water served no purpose other than matching the weight and slosh characteristics of regular Coke. The fatal flaw came from what Coca-Cola considered their smartest safety feature. Company executives were worried about what would happen if the mechanism failed and the chlorinated water somehow leaked. Their solution was to add ammonium sulfate to the chlorinated water. Ammonium sulfate is the same chemical compound that gives rotten eggs their distinctive sulfur smell. Basically, Coca-Cola intentionally turned their weight-matching water into a liquid stink bomb. The logic was simple. If the water leaked, people would immediately smell the rotten egg odor and know not to drink it. This safety feature became the source of the entire disaster. The spring-loaded mechanism that was supposed to work flawlessly started failing almost immediately after the cans hit store shelves. Instead of ejecting prizes when opened, many MagiCans either leaked their stink bomb water or the mechanism jammed completely, leaving customers with cans full of chlorinated water that smelled like rotten eggs. Customers who had no idea about the MagiCan promotion started getting mouthfuls of this foul-smelling liquid when they tried to drink what they thought was regular Coca-Cola. Imagine expecting the familiar taste of Coke and instead getting a mouthful of chlorinated water mixed with rotten egg smell. The complaints started pouring in within hours of the May 7th launch date. People were calling Coca-Cola's customer service lines, describing their drinks as tasting like fart water and liquid sulfur bombs. The mechanism failures weren't isolated incidents either. Coca-Cola's own internal estimates suggested that roughly 1% of the 750,000 MagiCans weren't working properly, with over 100,000 cans already distributed by the end of the first week. That meant thousands of defective cans were circulating in stores across America. Some cans leaked their stink bomb water onto store shelves, contaminating other products. Others had completely jammed mechanisms that turned them into expensive cans of rotten egg water. What made the situation even worse was that many customers didn't know about the promotion at all. Coca-Cola's advertising campaign was supposed to build awareness over the summer, But the defective cans reached stores before many people had seen the commercials or advertisements. So, regular Coke drinkers were encountering these malfunctioning cans with zero context about what was happening. From their perspective, Coca-Cola was just selling them poison. The volume of complaints flooding into Coca-Cola's headquarters was unprecedented. Customer service representatives were fielding hundreds of calls per day from angry customers demanding explanations about why their Coke smelled like rotten eggs. Store managers were calling to report displays of Coke cans that reeked of sulfur. Bottlers were panicking as they realized the defective cans were contaminating their regular production lines. Within 2 weeks of launch, major grocery chains were threatening to pull all Coca-Cola products from their shelves until the company could guarantee that no more stink bomb cans would reach customers. The negative publicity was spreading faster than Coca-Cola could control it. Local news stations were running stories about the fart water cans, and late-night comedians were making jokes about Coca-Cola trying to poison their customers. The promotion that was supposed to run through the entire summer was completely dead within 3 weeks. Coca-Cola had to recall all remaining MagiCans from stores, restaurants, and vending machines across the country. They issued public apologies and offered refunds to anyone who had purchased a defective can. The company estimated that the entire disaster cost them over $100 million in lost sales, recall costs, and damage control. But the MagiCan failure was just the beginning of a decade filled with beverage industry catastrophes that would make the rotten egg water incident look like a minor hiccup. The same corporate blindness that led to filling cans with stink bomb water would drive beverage companies to make even more spectacular mistakes throughout the decade. Each disaster followed the same pattern: ambitious planning, inadequate testing, catastrophic failure, and executives acting surprised that customers didn't appreciate the results. And sometimes, the math behind these promotional disasters would reach numbers that made Coca-Cola's $100 million loss seem almost reasonable. When Pepsi accidentally promised to make 800,000 people millionaires, just 4 years after Coca-Cola's MagiCan debacle, Pepsi managed to create a promotional disaster that made rotten egg water look like a minor inconvenience. In 1992, Pepsi accidentally promised to pay $40,000 each to 800,000 people in the Philippines. If Pepsi had honored their commitment, it would have cost them $32 billion, more than the entire GDP of most countries at the time. The context here is crucial. In 1992, Pepsi was getting absolutely crushed in the Filipino soft drink market. Coca-Cola dominated with a commanding 75% market share, while Pepsi was stuck at a pathetic 17%. The Filipino market represented millions of potential customers and massive growth opportunities, but Pepsi couldn't break through Coca-Cola's stranglehold on the country. Filipino consumers were loyal to Coke, and Pepsi needed something dramatic to change their minds. Enter the Number Fever promotion, launched in February 1992. Pepsi decided to capitalize on the Filipino love for gambling and games of chance. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Every bottle cap of Pepsi, 7-Up, Mountain Dew, and Mirinda would have a 3-digit number printed inside, ranging from 001 to 999. These numbers would be announced nightly on television, creating a national event where families would gather around their TVs to check their bottle caps. Pepsi capped prizes at 1 million pesos, about $40,000, but a printing blunder turned 800,000 caps into winners, promising a $32 billion tab. To put that grand prize in perspective, 1 million pesos represented roughly 611 times the average monthly salary in the Philippines. Winning the grand prize would literally make someone wealthy for life in a country where most people lived in poverty. The promotion wasn't just offering prize money, it was offering hope for a completely different life. The mechanics behind Number Fever were sophisticated for 1992. Pepsi hired DG Consultors, a Mexican marketing firm, to generate the winning numbers using computer algorithms. These winning numbers were stored in a secure safe deposit box in Manila to prevent any tampering or leaks. The system was designed to control prize distribution carefully, ensuring that Pepsi wouldn't accidentally give away more money than they had budgeted for the campaign. But there was one critical element that made this system work: security codes. Each legitimate winning bottle cap didn't just have the winning number printed on it. It also had a special security code that validated the cap as genuine. Without this security code, a bottle cap was worthless, even if it had the right number. This was Pepsi's fail-safe against counterfeiting and printing errors. Only 2 grand prize caps with proper security codes existed for the entire promotion. The initial results were exactly what Pepsi had hoped for. Number Fever became a cultural phenomenon in the Philippines. An estimated 31 million Filipinos participated in the promotion, checking their bottle caps religiously and tuning in to the nightly television announcements. Pepsi's monthly sales jumped from $10 million to $14 million. Their market share climbed from 19.4% to nearly 25% in just a few months. The campaign was working so well that Pepsi extended it beyond the original May 8th end date for an additional 5 weeks. But on May 25, 1992, everything went catastrophically wrong. The ABS-CBN Evening News announced that the grand prize winning number was 349. This should have been routine. Under normal circumstances, only the 2 people with legitimate 349 caps bearing the proper security codes would have become instant millionaires. Instead, what happened next was unprecedented in corporate promotional history. Due to a computer glitch at one of the bottling plants, 800,000 bottle caps had been printed with the number 349. The problem was that none of these caps had the required security code that would validate them as legitimate winners. The bottling plant had essentially mass-produced fake winning caps without anyone realizing it until it was too late. When the winning number 349 was announced on live television, chaos erupted across the Philippines. Suddenly, 800,000 people believed they had just won $40,000 each. They didn't know about the security code requirement. They didn't understand the technical error that had occurred. All they knew was that they had the winning number and they expected their money. Within hours, thousands of people began showing up at Pepsi bottling plants across the country, demanding their prize money. These weren't just individuals. Entire families and communities mobilized to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The crowds grew larger and more aggressive as Pepsi representatives tried to explain that the caps were invalid due to the missing security codes. Pepsi's initial response made the situation worse. Company executives declared all 349 caps invalid and refused to pay any prizes for that number. They offered 500 pesos, about $18, to holders of the defective caps as what they called a gesture of goodwill. This token payment insulted people who believed they were owed $40,000 each. Pepsi spent $8.9 million on these goodwill payments, but it did nothing to calm the outrage. The situation escalated from angry crowds to full-scale riots. Protesters surrounded Pepsi facilities, demanding justice and their prize money. Over 35 Pepsi delivery trucks were overturned, burned, stoned, or completely destroyed by angry mobs. Pepsi had to hire armed guards and install barbed wire around their facilities to protect their employees and property. The violence reached a tragic peak when someone threw a homemade bomb at a Pepsi truck in Manila. The explosion killed a schoolteacher and a 5-year-old child who had nothing to do with the promotion. 6 other innocent bystanders were injured in the attack. What had started as a marketing campaign to sell soft drinks had now cost people their lives. Legal warfare followed the physical violence. Approximately 22,000 people filed 689 civil lawsuits against PepsiCo for fraud and deception. Another 5,200 criminal complaints were filed against the company. The Philippine court system was overwhelmed with Pepsi-related cases that would drag on for years. In 1996, a trial court awarded plaintiffs in one lawsuit 10,000 pesos each for moral damages. But the legal battles continued until 2006, when the Philippine Supreme Court finally ruled that Pepsi was not liable to pay the amounts printed on the caps, citing no proof of negligence on the company's part. Here's the most incredible part of this entire disaster. Pepsi's sales recovered completely within just a few months. By 1994, their market share had stabilized at 21%, actually higher than before the Number Fever promotion began. The violence, the lawsuits, the deaths, the international embarrassment, none of it had any lasting impact on Pepsi's business in the Philippines. The 349 incident proved something disturbing about corporate marketing disasters. Companies could survive almost anything if they just waited long enough for public attention to move elsewhere. But while Pepsi was learning this lesson, in the Philippines, their biggest competitor was about to discover that some marketing mistakes are so fundamentally stupid that they transcend cultural boundaries and become universally embarrassing. Coke's bottled tap water that smelled like semen. In 2004, Coca Cola launched Dasani bottled water in the United Kingdom with an advertising campaign that featured the slogan "Full of Spunk." What Coca Cola's American marketing executives apparently didn't realize was that spunk is British slang for semen, triggering immediate media mockery across the UK. But the accidentally pornographic advertising was just the beginning of Coca Cola's problems with Dasani. The real controversy started when British consumers discovered what they were actually paying for. Coca-Cola was sourcing their premium bottled water directly from the municipal tap water supply in Sidcup, Kent. This wasn't spring water from some pristine mountain source or artesian well water that had been naturally filtered through ancient rock formations. It was literally the same water that came out of kitchen faucets across London and the surrounding areas. The pricing structure was absolutely outrageous. Coca-Cola was charging 95 pence for a half-liter bottle of Dasani, which worked out to about £1.90 per liter. Meanwhile, the same amount of tap water from Sidcup cost approximately 0.03 of a penny. That means Coca-Cola was marking up regular tap water by 31,600%. They were essentially asking British consumers to pay over 300 times more for water that was identical to what came out of their taps at home. Coca-Cola tried to justify this massive markup by positioning Dasani as a technologically advanced water product. Their marketing materials emphasized what they called multi-barrier filtration and reverse osmosis processing. The company claimed their water underwent purification techniques that had been perfected by NASA for space missions. According to Coca-Cola's promotional materials, regular tap water wasn't good enough for their customers. Only water that had been processed using space-age technology could meet their exacting standards. These NASA-grade purification claims were supposed to make consumers feel like they were getting something special for their money. Coca-Cola's marketing department worked overtime to create the impression that Dasani represented the pinnacle of water purification science. They published detailed explanations of their filtration process, highlighting how their advanced technology removed impurities that regular municipal water treatment couldn't handle. The purification process that Coca-Cola was so proud of involved taking perfectly good tap water from Sidcup and running it through reverse osmosis, then adding minerals back in to improve the taste. The final step involved ozone sterilization to eliminate any remaining bacteria or contaminants. On paper, this sounded impressive and scientifically sophisticated. In practice, it created a chemical disaster that would destroy Dasani's reputation in the UK forever. The ozone sterilization process that Coca-Cola used reacted with bromide, a naturally occurring element present in the Sidcup tap water. This chemical reaction produced bromate, a compound that has been classified as a potential cancer-causing agent by health authorities. Bromate levels in Dasani reached double the legal limit of 10 micrograms per liter after reverse osmosis and ozone sterilization reacted with natural bromide. So Coca-Cola's space-age purification process was actually making the water more dangerous than it had been before processing. The tap water from Sidcup that came directly from Thames water was completely safe to drink and met all regulatory standards. But after Coca-Cola put it through their advanced NASA-grade treatment, it contained potentially cancer-causing chemicals. Their purification process was literally poisoning the water. Thames Water, the utility company that supplied the original tap water to Coca-Cola, publicly stated that their water was already pure and didn't need any improvements. Company representatives pointed out that the water they delivered to Sidcup met or exceeded all British drinking water standards and was perfectly safe for human consumption straight from the tap. Thames Water officials essentially told the media that Coca Cola's expensive purification process was completely unnecessary and didn't improve the water quality in any meaningful way. When independent testing revealed the bromate contamination, the Food Standards Agency immediately issued a public warning advising people not to drink Dasani. The FSA stated that while there was no immediate health risk from drinking the water, the bromate levels exceeded legal limits, and the product should be avoided as a precautionary measure. This was devastating for a brand that had built its entire marketing campaign around purity and advanced purification technology. The media response was swift and brutal. British newspapers ran headlines about Coca-Cola selling contaminated tap water at premium prices. Television news programs featured segments comparing the cost of Dasani to regular tap water, highlighting the absurd markup. Comedy shows and satirical programs had a field day with the story, combining jokes about the full of spunk advertising campaign with the revelation that Coca-Cola was charging nearly £2 for tap water that contained cancer-causing chemicals. Within days of the Food Standards Agency warning, Coca-Cola announced a massive recall of Dasani products across the UK. The company pulled over 500,000 bottles from store shelves, vending machines, and restaurant suppliers. Every single bottle of Dasani in British retail circulation had to be collected and destroyed. The recall logistics alone cost Coca-Cola millions of pounds and required coordination with thousands of retailers across the country. The financial impact of the Dasani disaster extended far beyond the immediate recall costs. Coca-Cola had invested heavily in production facilities, marketing campaigns, and distribution networks to support their UK bottled water launch. Industry analysts estimated that the total cost of the Dasani failure reached several $100 million when factoring in lost sales, recall expenses, facility closures, and the termination of planned European expansion. More importantly, the Dasani disaster cost Coca-Cola their opportunity to enter the European bottled water market during a period of massive growth. The UK bottled water industry was worth £2.5 billion in 2004, and Coca-Cola had planned to use their British launch as a springboard for expansion across continental Europe. Instead, they had to cancel launches in France, Germany, and other major markets where the Dasani brand had been permanently damaged by the UK controversy. The Dasani disaster revealed the same pattern of corporate arrogance and inadequate testing that had plagued previous promotional failures. But while these disasters typically resulted from incompetence or oversight, some beverage industry catastrophe, the Tab Clear sabotage mission that killed Crystal Pepsi. What if I told you that Coca-Cola once created an entire product line specifically designed to fail just to destroy a competitor's billion-dollar opportunity? This wasn't corporate incompetence or accidental sabotage. This was calculated psychological warfare disguised as business competition, and it worked exactly as planned. The early 1990s were dominated by what marketers called the clear product craze. Companies across every industry were launching transparent versions of their existing products, capitalizing on consumer psychology that associated clear with pure, healthy, and natural. Ivory Soap released a clear version of their dish detergent. Beer companies experimented with clear malt beverages. Even cleaning products jumped on the transparency trend, promising consumers that clear meant cleaner and safer. In 1992, PepsiCo launched Crystal Pepsi right into the heart of this clear product phenomenon. The concept was straightforward. Take regular Pepsi, remove the caramel coloring that gave it the traditional brown color, and market it as a pure, clean alternative to traditional colas. Crystal Pepsi tasted nearly identical to regular Pepsi, but looked like carbonated water with a slight hint of citrus. The visual impact was striking when compared to the dark brown color that consumers associated with cola drinks. Crystal Pepsi's initial performance exceeded everyone's expectations, including Pepsi's own internal projections. Within months of launch, The clear cola had captured nearly 1% of the entire American soft drink market. That single percentage point translated to approximately $500 million in annual sales potential. To put this in perspective, 1% of the soda market in 1992 represented more revenue than most major corporations generated from their entire product portfolios. The success of Crystal Pepsi sent shockwaves through Coca Cola's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. Their biggest competitor had stumbled onto something that could potentially reshape the entire cola industry. If clear colas became the new standard, Coca-Cola would need to completely reformulate their flagship product or risk losing market share to what consumers perceived as a cleaner, more modern alternative. Coca-Cola executives recognized that they had two options: create their own clear cola to compete directly with Crystal Pepsi, or find a way to destroy the clear cola category entirely before it became established. They chose the second option, and their strategy was absolutely diabolical in its psychological sophistication. The plan centered around exploiting consumer perceptions about diet sodas in the early 1990s. Market research had shown that diet colas were predominantly consumed by women who were concerned about calorie intake and weight management. Regular colas, particularly Coca Cola and Pepsi, were seen as products for everyone, but diet versions carried a social stigma that made many male consumers reluctant to purchase them. Coca-Cola's executives realized they could weaponize this gender-based product perception against Crystal Pepsi. Enter Tab Clear, launched in December 1993. Coca-Cola created Tab Clear as a diet, decaffeinated cola with the caramel coloring removed, and positioned it directly next to Crystal Pepsi on store shelves to make consumers assume the clear cola category was diet and unsellable. The product was essentially regular Tab, Coca-Cola's existing diet cola, with the caramel coloring removed and the caffeine taken out. It was caffeine-free, sugar-free, and calorie-free, positioned as a diet drink for health-conscious consumers who wanted the clear cola experience without any of the traditional cola ingredients. The genius of Tab Clear wasn't in the product itself, but in its strategic shelf placement and marketing positioning. Coca-Cola made sure that Tab Clear was displayed directly next to Crystal Pepsi in grocery stores, convenience stores, and vending machines across the country. The two products looked nearly identical from a distance, both featuring clear liquid in similar bottle designs. Consumers approaching the clear cola section would see these two products side by side, creating immediate confusion about their differences. Coca-Cola's marketing campaign for Tab Clear emphasized its diet characteristics and health benefits. Television commercials featured the same demographic of health-conscious women who appeared in advertisements for other diet sodas. The messaging consistently reinforced that Tab Clear was a diet product designed for people who wanted to avoid sugar, calories, and caffeine. Every element of the Tab Clear campaign was designed to establish clear colas as diet drinks in the minds of consumers. The psychological manipulation was working exactly as Coca-Cola had planned. Consumers who encountered Crystal Pepsi and Tab Clear together on store shelves began experiencing what marketing psychologists call category confusion. They weren't sure what Crystal Pepsi actually contained or who it was designed for. If Tab Clear was obviously a diet drink, what made Crystal Pepsi different? This uncertainty created anxiety among potential Crystal Pepsi customers, particularly male consumers who were already hesitant about purchasing products that might be perceived as diet drinks. The strategy's effectiveness became apparent within months of Tab Clear's launch. Crystal Pepsi sales began declining as consumers associated the entire clear cola category with diet drinks. The product that had initially captured $500 million of market potential was now struggling to maintain its shelf space in major retailers. Sergio Zyman, Coca-Cola's head of marketing during this period, later admitted that Tab Clear had been designed as what he called a suicidal mission. The product was never intended to succeed or generate profits for Coca-Cola. Its sole purpose was to create market confusion that would destroy Crystal Pepsi's growth potential. Both products died within months of each other, exactly as Coca-Cola had planned. Tab Clear was quietly discontinued in 1994, having served its purpose of sabotaging the clear cola market. Crystal Pepsi followed shortly afterward, unable to recover from the consumer confusion and category contamination that Tab Clear had created. Pepsi's $500 million opportunity had been completely eliminated through strategic psychological manipulation. The Tab Clear strategy represented one of the most sophisticated examples of competitive sabotage in corporate history. Coca-Cola had successfully weaponized consumer psychology to destroy a competitor's product without breaking any laws or engaging in traditional anti-competitive practices. They had created a product specifically designed to fail, used it to contaminate an entire product category, and then abandoned it once their competitor had been eliminated from the market. But corporate beverage warfare wasn't always about destroying competitors. Sometimes the most unlikely alliances formed between bitter enemies, creating diplomatic solutions that seemed impossible on paper. The most extraordinary example of this involved a Soviet war hero whose secret addiction would reshape international relations. Marshal Zhukov's secret Coca-Cola addiction. In 1945, Marshal Georgy Zhukov had just finished conquering Berlin and helping to end World War II in Europe when he encountered something that would create an international diplomatic crisis: American Coca-Cola. Zhukov was one of the Soviet Union's greatest military heroes, the man who had led the final assault on Nazi Germany and accepted their surrender on behalf of the Red Army. He was also about to become secretly addicted to the most capitalist beverage on Earth. The addiction started during post-war celebrations with American military officers in occupied Germany. When American officers offered Zhukov a bottle of Coca-Cola, he tried it out of diplomatic courtesy. The sweet, carbonated drink was unlike anything available in the Soviet Union. Within weeks, Zhukov was actively seeking out opportunities to drink Coca-Cola whenever he met with American military personnel, developing a genuine chemical dependency on a product that represented everything the Soviet Union opposed. The problem became apparent when Zhukov returned to Moscow. Coca-Cola was completely banned in the USSR as a symbol of Western capitalism and American cultural imperialism. Stalin's government viewed American consumer products as tools of ideological warfare designed to corrupt Soviet citizens with bourgeois values. Any association with American products would have been political suicide and potentially resulted in imprisonment or execution. Zhukov reached out through diplomatic channels to American General Mark Clark, explaining his predicament in carefully coded language. He needed the drink to look like something acceptable for a Soviet military leader to consume in public. President Harry Truman was personally briefed on Zhukov's request and authorized a top-secret operation involving James Farley, chairman of the Coca-Cola Export Corporation. Farley's solution was elegantly simple. The distinctive reddish-brown color of Coca-Cola came entirely from caramel coloring added during manufacturing. Removing this caramel coloring would create a clear liquid that looked exactly like vodka, the most common alcoholic beverage in the Soviet Union. According to Farley, eliminating the caramel coloring would have virtually no impact on the taste. The clear Coca-Cola was packaged in straight-walled bottles that resembled standard vodka containers. Each bottle cap was printed with a Soviet Red Star, the symbol of the Red Army and Communist Authority. In 1946, 50 cases of this white Coke were delivered in caps embossed with the Soviet star. From a distance, the bottles looked exactly like official Soviet vodka that would be appropriate for a military commander to possess and consume. This covert operation allowed Zhukov to satisfy his Coca-Cola addiction without compromising his position in the Soviet hierarchy. He could drink American Coca-Cola in front of other Soviet officials, and they would assume he was consuming patriotic Russian vodka. Zhukov reportedly kept cases of the disguised Coca-Cola in his office and residence, consuming multiple bottles per day without anyone questioning his apparent vodka consumption habits. The irony extended far beyond Zhukov's personal beverage preferences. While Coca-Cola was secretly supplying their product to one of the most powerful figures in the Soviet military establishment, they were simultaneously refusing to engage in any official business relationships with communist countries. Coca-Cola's corporate leadership viewed the Soviet Union as fundamentally incompatible with their business model and American values. This corporate reluctance created an opening that Pepsi would eventually exploit to spectacular effect. While Coca-Cola maintained their ideological opposition to communist markets, Pepsi recognized the massive business opportunity represented by hundreds of millions of Soviet consumers who had never tasted American soft drinks. Pepsi executives began developing relationships with Soviet officials, including future leader Nikita Khrushchev, that would eventually lead to unprecedented business arrangements. The breakthrough came when Pepsi negotiated a unique barter system that allowed them to enter the Soviet market without requiring hard currency transactions. Instead of selling cola syrup for rubles or dollars, Pepsi agreed to accept payment in the form of exclusive United States distribution rights for Stolichnaya vodka. This arrangement satisfied Soviet economic planners who wanted Western technology and products, but couldn't afford to spend precious foreign currency reserves on soft drinks. By 1989, the Pepsi-Soviet relationship had evolved into something even more bizarre than Zhukov's disguised Coca-Cola bottles. The Soviet Union agreed to pay Pepsi with a fleet of military vessels, including 17 submarines, frigates, cruisers, and battleships that Pepsi could sell for scrap metal. This transaction briefly made Pepsi the world's sixth-largest navy, a fact that Pepsi executive Donald Kendall used to taunt American government officials. As Kendall told President George H.W. Bush's National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." The transformation of beverage preferences into instruments of Cold War diplomacy demonstrated how corporate products could become symbols of ideological conflict and political maneuvering at the highest levels of international relations. But while these Cold War beverage deals required elaborate diplomatic negotiations and years of careful relationship building, the corporate disasters of the 1990s would prove that a single careless comment from a CEO could destroy decades of brand reputation in a matter of hours. The vending machine price surge scandal. In 1999, Coca-Cola CEO Doug Ivester sat down for what he thought would be a routine interview with Brazilian magazine Veja and proceeded to accidentally destroy his own career with a single admission. When asked about the company's future pricing strategies, Ivester casually revealed that Coca-Cola had been developing vending machines equipped with thermostats that would automatically raise prices when temperatures climbed above certain thresholds. He explained that the technology was designed to capitalize on increased demand for cold drinks during hot weather, stating that it was fair for Coca-Cola to cost more when people needed it most. What Ivester didn't realize was that he had just publicly admitted to a price gouging scheme that would make his company look like vultures preying on thirsty customers. The technology behind these temperature-sensing vending machines was actually quite sophisticated for 1999. Each machine contained digital thermometers connected to pricing software that could adjust costs in real time based on ambient temperature readings. When the temperature hit 85 degrees Fahrenheit, a 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola might jump from 75 cents to $1.25. On particularly scorching days above 95 degrees, prices could spike to $2 or more for the same product that cost 75 cents in air-conditioned indoor locations. Coca-Cola had been secretly testing these machines in Japan for nearly a year before Ivester's interview, monitoring consumer behavior and fine-tuning the pricing algorithms. The Japanese market served as a perfect testing ground because vending machines were ubiquitous throughout the country and consumers were accustomed to paying premium prices for convenience. Initial results from the Japanese trials showed that customers would pay significantly higher prices for cold drinks during hot weather, particularly in locations where alternative beverage options were limited. The public reaction to Ivester's admission was immediate and absolutely brutal. Consumers across the United States expressed outrage at what they perceived as corporate exploitation of basic human needs. Social advocacy groups condemned the plan as predatory pricing that would disproportionately impact low-income families and outdoor workers who couldn't afford to pay premium prices for drinks during hot weather. Media outlets ran stories comparing Coca-Cola's pricing strategy to war profiteering and emergency price gouging during natural disasters. Pepsi immediately recognized the public relations disaster that Coca-Cola had created and launched a savage counterattack marketing campaign. Pepsi spokesman Jeff Brown issued a statement declaring, "We believe that machines that raise prices in hot weather exploit consumers who live in warm climates." Pepsi's marketing team quickly developed advertisements emphasizing their commitment to consistent pricing regardless of weather conditions, positioning themselves as the consumer-friendly alternative to Coca-Cola's corporate greed. The timing of Ivestor's admission couldn't have been worse for Coca-Cola's relationship with their bottling partners. The company had already been facing significant internal pressure from bottlers who were unhappy about recent concentrate price increases that had squeezed their profit margins. These bottlers viewed the temperature-sensing vending machine plan as another example of corporate headquarters prioritizing short-term profits over long-term brand relationships. As negative media coverage continued to spread, Coca-Cola's stock price began plummeting. The stock dropped from $37 per share to $18 in approximately 5 months, representing a loss of over $1.4 billion in market value. Investors who had been concerned about the company's leadership under Ivestor now had concrete evidence that management was making decisions that could permanently damage the brand's reputation. Coca-Cola's corporate communications team went into full damage control mode, attempting to walk back Ivestor's statements and minimize the public relations catastrophe. Company spokesman Rob Baskin issued statements denying that Coca-Cola had ever seriously planned to implement temperature-based pricing, despite the fact that Ivestor had explicitly described ongoing trials and development work. When the denial strategy failed to calm public outrage, Baskin announced that if the company ever did introduce variable pricing technology, it would almost certainly be used to offer discounts during off-peak times rather than price increases during peak demand periods. The corporate spin efforts were too little, too late to save Ivestor's career. Major shareholders, including Warren Buffett and Herbert Allen, had watched the stock price collapse and decided that new leadership was needed to restore investor confidence. These shareholders arranged a private meeting with Ivestor where they politely but firmly explained that he needed to either resign voluntarily or face a public removal process. The shareholders had lost confidence in Ivestor's judgment and ability to protect the Coca-Cola brand from further self-inflicted damage. Despite nearly destroying the company's reputation and stock price, Ivestor was awarded a retirement package worth approximately $166 million. This golden parachute payment was equivalent to about $240 million in today's money, meaning that Ivestor was essentially rewarded for his failures with a $250 million severance package. The massive payout generated additional controversy as investors questioned why failed executives received such generous compensation while shareholders suffered massive losses. The temperature-sensing vending machine scandal demonstrated how quickly corporate missteps could spiral out of control in the emerging information age of the late 1990s. News of Ivestor's admission spread through traditional media outlets, but the story also began circulating through early internet forums and email chains that amplified the outrage beyond what previous corporate scandals had experienced. This incident provided just a glimpse of how much more devastating such disasters would become as communication technology continued to evolve. 2025's social media amplification effect. Today's digital landscape would transform any MagiCan-style disaster into something exponentially more devastating. A single TikTok video of someone spitting out rotten egg water would reach TikTok's projected 2.14 billion users by 2025, creating a global crisis within hours instead of weeks. The hashtag #CokeStinkBomb would trend across every platform simultaneously, spawning millions of reactions. Videos, parody content, and copycat posts from users testing their own cans for sulfur smells. The speed difference is staggering. In 1990, customers had to call Coca-Cola's customer service line, write letters to newspapers, or hope local TV stations would cover their complaints. News traveled through traditional media cycles that took days or weeks to reach national attention. One viral video today reaches more people in 60 minutes than all the 1990s MagiCan coverage combined reached in months. Modern meme culture would transform the disaster into entertainment content with infinite staying power. Users would create remix videos set to trending songs, compilation videos of people reacting to stink bomb water, and elaborate conspiracy theories about Coca Cola intentionally poisoning customers. These memes would extend the disaster's life cycle indefinitely, ensuring new audiences discover the story months or years after the original incident. Twitter's real-time format would create ratio culture where negative posts about Coca Cola receive exponentially more engagement than corporate damage control attempts. Company executives trying to explain spring-loaded mechanisms and chlorinated water would be drowned out by users posting simple messages like "Coke is literally selling poison" with crying laughing emojis and skull icons. The platform's character limit forces complex issues into oversimplified soundbites that favor emotional reactions over technical explanations. Reddit communities would spawn dedicated subreddits tracking every aspect of the disaster. Users would crowdsource information about affected batch numbers, create maps showing where defective cans were sold, and organize detailed investigations into corporate responses. The upvote system would ensure the most damaging information rose to the top of discussions, creating persistent repositories of negative content ranking highly in search results for years. Corporate boycott organization through social media has evolved into sophisticated economic warfare. Consumers use Discord and Telegram to coordinate purchasing decisions, share alternative product information, and track boycott effectiveness. These campaigns can reduce company sales by double-digit percentages within weeks, forcing immediate responses that weren't necessary during slower media cycles. Financial impacts extend far beyond immediate sales losses. Companies track dozens of digital metrics directly correlating to stock movements and investor confidence. Sentiment analysis algorithms monitor millions of posts calculating precise brand perception measurements. Hashtag monitoring systems alert executives within minutes when negative content trends. Nearly half of social media users rely on influencer recommendations for purchasing decisions, meaning negative posts from popular creators influence millions of consumers simultaneously. Food and beverage influencers with massive followings would inevitably create content about a MagiCan disaster, testing cans themselves and sharing reactions with audiences who trust their opinions more than traditional advertising. Modern crisis management has evolved to address social media backlash speed and scale, but strategies often prove inadequate for containing truly viral disasters. Traditional damage control involved press releases and scheduled interviews over days or weeks. Today's crisis management requires real-time responses across dozens of platforms simultaneously, often within minutes of incidents occurring. Companies employ social media specialist teams monitoring platforms 24 hours daily, using sophisticated software tracking conversation volume, sentiment trends, and geographic spread of negative content. The global reach means corporate disasters instantly become international incidents. A MagiCan-style failure wouldn't just affect American consumers. Users in dozens of countries would immediately see content and question Coca-Cola product safety in their markets. International regulatory agencies would launch investigations based on social media evidence alone, creating cascading regulatory challenges across multiple jurisdictions. Businesses allocate an average of 14.9% of marketing budgets specifically to social media, reflecting platform importance in brand management. This investment demonstrates how seriously corporations take social media reputation management, but also shows vulnerability to viral backlash that can destroy millions in marketing investments instantly. The social media market's projected worth of almost $256 billion by 2028 indicates how much economic activity depends on digital platform performance. Major beverage companies experiencing viral backlash would see immediate impacts across entire digital marketing ecosystems, affecting everything from advertising effectiveness to influencer partnership opportunities. The amplification effect means a MagiCan equivalent would trend globally within hours instead of weeks, reaching billions instead of millions, generating financial damage in tens of billions rather than hundreds of millions. Corporate learning curves haven't kept pace with technological acceleration, leaving companies more vulnerable to spectacular failures, even as potential consequences have grown exponentially more severe. Yet, despite witnessing decades of these catastrophic promotional disasters, beverage companies continue making the same fundamental mistakes that destroyed their predecessors. The pattern repeats with predictable regularity, suggesting these failures aren't random accidents, but symptoms of the science behind why these disasters keep happening. Corporate executives aren't stupid people making random mistakes. These beverage disasters happen because of two fundamental psychological problems that create predictable patterns of failure: corporate hubris and sunk cost mentality. Corporate hubris drives companies to believe their sophisticated engineering and market research make them immune to basic consumer psychology. When Coca Cola executives approved filling cans with chlorinated water that smelled like rotten eggs, they weren't considering how customers would react to accidentally drinking it. They were focused on engineering sophistication and promotional uniqueness. This institutional arrogance develops from market dominance and historical success, creating blind spots where executives assume their procedures couldn't possibly miss fundamental problems. The hubris extends to dismissing negative feedback from employees, bottlers, and retail partners who interact directly with customers. When Coca-Cola bottlers started reporting problems with MagiCan mechanisms, corporate headquarters treated these reports as operational issues rather than fundamental design problems. The assumption was that bottlers didn't understand the sophisticated technology and were overreacting to minor glitches. This top-down dismissal creates information bubbles where executives don't receive accurate data about emerging problems until they become public relations crises. Sunk cost mentality makes companies double down on failing projects instead of cutting losses early when problems emerge. Research on sunk cost fallacy shows that previous investments make it psychologically difficult to abandon projects, even when continuing becomes obviously counterproductive. When Coca-Cola received the first complaints about defective MagiCans, the rational response would have been immediate recall and redesign. Instead, executives convinced themselves that problems were isolated incidents manageable through customer service rather than fundamental design flaws requiring complete campaign termination. The competitive warfare between Coca-Cola and Pepsi amplifies both problems by creating pressure to escalate promotional strategies constantly. This rivalry pushes companies toward increasingly risky concepts that prioritize short-term market impact over long-term brand safety. Each campaign needs to be bigger and more memorable than the last one. Coca-Cola's MagiCan promotion wasn't just about giving away prizes. It was about proving their promotional technology was more sophisticated than anything Pepsi could create. Market research failures and inadequate testing contribute significantly to these disasters. Companies consistently underestimate the complexity of real-world product performance compared to controlled testing environments. The MagiCan mechanism worked perfectly in laboratory conditions where temperature, humidity, and handling were carefully controlled. But retail environments involve extreme temperature variations, rough handling during shipping, extended storage periods, and consumer behavior that doesn't match testing protocols. Financial incentive structures reward short-term gains over long-term brand protection, creating systematic bias toward risky promotional strategies. Executive compensation packages typically include bonuses based on quarterly sales performance and annual market share growth rather than long-term brand health metrics. This makes it financially rational for executives to approve high-risk promotions that might generate immediate sales spikes, even if they create potential reputation damage. Budget allocation processes reinforce short-term thinking by separating promotional spending from crisis management costs. Marketing departments receive large budgets for creative campaigns, but aren't financially responsible for cleanup costs when promotions fail. Crisis management, legal settlements, and reputation repair costs are handled by different departments with separate budgets, eliminating the financial feedback loop that would otherwise discourage risky promotional strategies. Legal and regulatory gaps allow companies to launch potentially harmful promotions without adequate oversight. The regulatory framework for promotional campaigns focuses on truth in advertising and prize fulfillment rather than product safety or consumer protection. Coca Cola's MagiCan promotion was legally compliant, even though it involved distributing thousands of cans containing chemicals that could make people sick. The disconnect between corporate boardrooms and real-world consumer behavior creates systematic blind spots. Executives making promotional decisions are removed from day-to-day customer interactions by multiple layers of corporate hierarchy. Their information about consumer preferences comes through filtered reports and market research summaries that often fail to capture the complexity of real-world reactions. Social media amplification has made these underlying problems worse by increasing pressure for viral promotional concepts that capture immediate attention. The same corporate psychology that led to spring-loaded cash dispensers now drives companies toward increasingly desperate attempts to create shareable content and trending hashtags. Modern companies have better technology and more sophisticated market research, but they haven't fundamentally changed the decision-making processes that generate these predictable failures. Interestingly, research shows that 97% of brands now check their online reputation after a crisis, indicating modern awareness of digital backlash potential. Yet, this awareness hasn't prevented companies from making the same fundamental mistakes. They monitor social media reactions more carefully, but they haven't addressed the corporate hubris and sunk cost mentality that create disasters in the first place. The competitive pressure, psychological biases, and institutional incentives that created historical disasters continue driving modern marketing failures. Companies still operate with the same decision-making processes that generated the MagiCan disaster, Pepsi's Number Fever catastrophe, and Dasani's contaminated water scandal. Pattern recognition reveals that future beverage industry disasters are virtually guaranteed because none of the underlying causes have been systematically addressed. These psychological and structural factors ensure that spectacular promotional failures will continue occurring with predictable regularity across different companies, markets, and time periods. The fundamental patterns remain unchanged, creating an environment where corporate blindness repeats itself decade after decade. Modern beverage disasters you haven't heard about. While these psychological patterns persist, they're now creating disasters that would have been unimaginable in previous decades. Modern beverage companies continue making the same fundamental mistakes, but today's technology and social media amplification turn relatively minor failures into industry-wide catastrophes that destroy billions in market value within hours. The energy drink industry provides the clearest example of how corporate arrogance has evolved with modern marketing techniques. Since 2020, manufacturers have faced mounting regulatory scrutiny and multiple lawsuits, highlighting the cardiovascular dangers of high-caffeine beverages. The Center for Science in the Public Interest released a comprehensive 2023 report exposing how energy drink companies systematically target young consumers with misleading health claims while downplaying serious risks associated with products containing more caffeine than multiple cups of coffee. What makes this scandal particularly egregious is how companies have responded to mounting evidence of health problems. Instead of reformulating products or providing clearer warnings, manufacturers have doubled down on aggressive marketing campaigns, specifically targeting teenagers and young adults through social media influencers and extreme sports sponsorships. These companies know their products can cause heart palpitations, anxiety disorders, and sleep disruption, but they've chosen to fight regulatory oversight rather than address underlying safety concerns. The response pattern mirrors exactly what happened with historical disasters. Energy drink executives dismiss health concerns as overblown, claim their products are safe when consumed responsibly, and argue that regulatory restrictions would unfairly punish their industry. They're using the same corporate playbook that led Coca Cola to fill cans with rotten egg water and Pepsi to promise billions in prize money they couldn't afford to pay. Contamination scandals continue plaguing the beverage industry with identical corporate cover-up mentalities that characterized previous decades' disasters. The 2022 bottled water benzene crisis demonstrates how companies still prioritize profits over consumer safety when facing expensive manufacturing problems. A major bottled water brand was forced to recall millions of bottles after independent testing detected elevated levels of benzene, a known carcinogen, in their products. The contamination was traced to faulty manufacturing processes that the company had known about for months, but chosen not to address, because fixing the problem would have required expensive equipment upgrades and temporary production shutdowns. The benzene levels exceeded federal safety limits by significant margins, with some bottles containing concentrations that posed genuine health risks with regular consumption. The contamination affected multiple production facilities across several states, indicating systematic quality control failures rather than isolated incidents. Independent laboratory analysis revealed that benzene concentrations in some bottles reached levels 3 times higher than maximum allowable limits established by the Environmental Protection Agency. The company's initial response followed the same pattern of corporate denial and minimization that characterized historical beverage disasters. Executives claimed benzene levels were within acceptable ranges and posed no immediate health risks, despite the fact that no level of benzene consumption is considered safe by health authorities. Company representatives argued that the contamination was limited to specific production batches and didn't represent broader quality control problems. Only after facing potential federal intervention did the company acknowledge the severity of the contamination and begin the recall process. The recall ultimately involved over 8 million bottles distributed across 43 states, making it one of the largest bottled water recalls in American history. The company spent approximately $60 million on recall logistics, customer refunds, and facility upgrades to address the manufacturing problems that caused the contamination. The financial impact extended far beyond immediate recall costs. The company's stock price dropped 28% within 2 weeks of the recall announcement, eliminating over $400 million in market value. Consumer confidence surveys showed that brand trust declined by 47% among regular customers, with many switching permanently to competitor products. The company's market share in the bottled water category fell from 12% to 7% within 6 months of the crisis. But the most revealing aspect of this disaster was how quickly it disappeared from public attention. Despite affecting millions of consumers and involving a known carcinogen, the story generated minimal sustained media coverage compared to historical beverage disasters. The company's crisis management team successfully limited negative publicity by timing their recall announcement to coincide with major news events that dominated media cycles. This demonstrates how modern companies have become more sophisticated at managing crisis communications while remaining fundamentally unchanged in their willingness to prioritize profits over consumer safety. They've learned to control information flow and minimize publicity damage, but they haven't addressed the corporate psychology that creates these disasters in the first place. The benzene contamination incident proves that beverage companies continue operating with the same risk-taking mentality and inadequate quality control that generated historical catastrophes. They still cut corners on manufacturing processes, ignore warning signs until problems become unavoidable, and assume they can manage consumer backlash through public relations rather than fundamental operational changes. These modern disasters reveal that technological advancement and improved crisis management haven't eliminated the corporate blindness that drives beverage industry failures. Companies have better tools for monitoring social media reactions and controlling negative publicity, but they're still making the same fundamental decisions that filled cans with stink bomb water 35 years ago. The scale of financial damage from these modern failures, however, has grown exponentially compared to historical disasters. What seemed like massive losses in previous decades now appear almost quaint when measured against today's market conditions and global reach. What these disasters cost in today's money. Converting these historical disasters into current financial terms reveals the true magnitude of corporate incompetence that beverage companies somehow survived. MagiCan's failure cost $100 million in 1990, equivalent to roughly $220 million today. Pepsi's Number Fever error would equate to over $55 billion now. Dasani's UK failure blocked a $10 billion-plus European water market. Crystal Pepsi's lost share could have been $2 billion per year today. But inflation adjustments only scratch the surface of what these disasters would cost in the modern economy. The beverage market has expanded exponentially since the 1990s, with global annual revenues now exceeding $1.5 trillion compared to roughly $300 billion 30 years ago. Marketing budgets have grown proportionally, meaning a modern equivalent of the MagiCan promotion would require initial investment exceeding $500 million just for engineering, manufacturing, and global distribution of prize dispensing mechanisms. When that hypothetical campaign failed due to identical technical problems, cleanup costs would be exponentially higher due to social media amplification and international regulatory scrutiny. Modern crisis management requires coordinated responses across dozens of countries simultaneously, with legal teams handling class action lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions and public relations specialists managing reputation damage across every digital platform. The real financial devastation comes from compound brand value losses that accumulate over decades. Modern companies track sophisticated metrics linking promotional disasters to long-term revenue decline, customer acquisition costs, and market share erosion. These measurements reveal cascading effects that weren't calculable in previous decades, but now represent the majority of disaster-related financial damage. Coca-Cola's missing discounts in dynamic pricing caused a 15% sales drop in test markets, demonstrating how modern consumers punish companies for perceived exploitation with immediate purchasing behavior changes. This sensitivity means promotional disasters create measurable financial impact across multiple quarters, affecting stock prices, executive compensation, and strategic planning in ways that were impossible before real-time global communication. Pepsi's Number Fever catastrophe represents the most expensive promotional disaster in corporate history when calculated with modern legal and social media implications. The original $32 billion potential payout would exceed $55 billion in current dollars, but that calculation dramatically underestimates true modern costs. The 800,000 people who believe they had won $40,000 each would have immediate access to social media platforms, legal crowdfunding, and international advocacy groups that didn't exist in 1992. Their coordinated response would be exponentially more organized and effective than the riots and protests that actually occurred. Modern class action lawsuits in similar cases have resulted in settlements exceeding $10 billion, and Pepsi would face legal challenges in multiple countries simultaneously as international consumers demanded compensation for similar promotional errors in their markets. The global beverage market expansion means similar promotional errors today would affect millions of consumers across over 200 countries where major beverage companies now operate. Pepsi's current international presence dwarfs their 1990s global footprint, creating legal and financial obligations that could exceed $100 billion in total settlements and regulatory fines for a Number Fever scale disaster. Coca Cola's Dasani disaster cost hundreds of millions in 2004, but the long-term opportunity costs are far more significant when calculated in current market conditions. The UK bottled water market was worth £2.5 billion in 2004, equivalent to approximately $4.5 billion in current money. The European bottled water market has since grown to over $30 billion annually, representing decades of lost market share and revenue generation. Coca-Cola's failure to establish European bottled water presence during the critical growth period when consumer preferences shifted toward premium products cost them compound growth opportunities. Modern bottled water companies like Nestle and Danone generate billions annually from European operations that Coca-Cola could have captured. Their current water portfolio generates approximately $700 million annually in the United States alone, suggesting successful European expansion could have added multiple billions to their revenue stream over 2 decades. Crystal Pepsi's lost potential represents one of the most significant missed opportunities in beverage industry history. The product initially captured nearly 1% of the American soda market, representing approximately $500 million in annual sales potential. The current American beverage market generates over $200 billion in annual revenue, meaning 1% market share today would represent over $2 billion in yearly sales. If Crystal Pepsi had successfully established the clear cola category and maintained even half its initial market penetration, PepsiCo could have generated cumulative revenues exceeding $30 billion over 3 decades. The compound growth potential extends beyond the original product to include line extensions, international expansion, and category leadership that would have influenced consumer preferences for generations. Modern corporate disaster costs have escalated beyond anything companies faced in previous decades due to social media amplification, global regulatory coordination, and sophisticated damage calculation methods. A single viral corporate failure can generate measurable financial impact across multiple quarters, affecting everything from stock valuations to executive retention in ways that were impossible before instantaneous global communication. Companies now employ teams of data scientists tracking dozens of financial metrics related to brand reputation, social media sentiment, and consumer trust that directly correlate to long-term revenue generation. These measurements reveal that promotional disasters create cascading financial effects compounding over years or decades, making true costs far higher than immediate cleanup expenses suggest. The promotional disasters that seemed manageable in the 1990s would each represent multi-billion-dollar catastrophes in today's interconnected global economy. The scale of potential financial destruction has grown exponentially faster than corporate learning or risk management capabilities, creating conditions where single promotional mistakes could threaten survival of even the largest beverage companies. These weren't just expensive mistakes from a simpler era. They were warnings about corporate vulnerabilities that have only become more dangerous as technology and global communication evolved. Yet, companies continue making identical decisions with predictable results. The beverage industry's pattern of failure reveals 3 fundamental lessons that executives consistently ignore. First, always test products in real-world conditions rather than controlled laboratory environments where mechanisms work perfectly but fail spectacularly when exposed to temperature variations, rough handling, and extended storage periods. Second, heed consumer feedback from bottlers, retail partners, and early customers who interact directly with products and can identify problems before they become public relations disasters. Third, never let corporate arrogance outweigh common sense when evaluating promotional concepts that seem too sophisticated or generous to work reliably. The same executive mindset that approved filling cans with rotten egg water continues driving modern companies toward predictable failures that destroy billions in market value. Share your favorite